Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. On October 2nd, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul seeking to retrieve some marriage documents related to his upcoming wedding. He never came out. Turkish authorities believe he was tortured and murdered by Saudi intelligence officers sent to kill him. This incident has profoundly shaken Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States. Khashoggi was well known and well liked by journalists and others in policy circles in Washington, D.C. He was a columnist for the Washington Post and had a residence in Northern Virginia. Yet, despite his connections, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, apparently ordered a hit job. On the line with me to discuss the international implications of this incident is Simon Henderson. He is the Baker Fellow and Director of the Bernstein Program on Gulf and Energy Policy at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He was a friend of Khashoggi's, and he explains who Khashoggi was and how his murder may impact Saudi Arabia's relationship with both Turkey and the United States. This conversation does a good job of putting this incident in a broader context of Saudi Arabia's transitions under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Details from the incident in the Saudi consulate are still emerging. We recorded this conversation on Friday, October 12th, and I do think that Simon Henderson provides some useful context that will help you understand how we reached a point where the Saudi government was willing to so brazenly murder a high-profile critic of the Crown Prince. So here is my conversation with Simon Henderson of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
Who is Jamal Khashoggi? I fear the answer to that question is that it should be who was Jamal Khashoggi. He was, amongst other things, a friend of mine, and we've met and had conversations over the years. I wouldn't say we were good friends, but I liked talking to him and hearing his points of view. And he was either interested in my points of view or tolerant of my questions. He was a Saudi journalist who had been in a variety of senior editorial positions in Saudi newspapers, and had also been in Saudi government circles. At various times he had worked for a man called Turki al-Faisal, Prince Turki al-Faisal, who for many years was the head of Saudi General Intelligence, which is their equivalent of the CIA. But I think Jamal only worked for Prince Turki when Prince Turki was, after that, subsequently, first of all, Saudi ambassador in London and then Saudi ambassador here in Washington.
So he was obviously well-known in Washington, D.C. circles and served in the government. At what point did he have a sort of falling out with the government?
Well, in fact, he's probably had several falling outs with the government. He was fired from being editor on certainly one occasion, and if not two. But that's part of the scheme of being an editor, not only in Saudi Arabia, but across the Middle East, which is that you're there to serve the government purpose and toe the government line. Jamal had a sort of mischievous streak in him, which meant that he occasionally tried to push the envelope. Sometimes he got away with it, sometimes he didn't. But where he really fell down was after the transition 2 or 3 years ago in Saudi Arabia, when first of all King Salman became the monarch, and within a few months he had promoted his favorite son, but one of his younger sons, Mohammed bin Salman, often known as just simply as MBS. He was promoted to being a deputy crown prince, and then in last year he was made into crown prince. So he is the heir apparent in Saudi Arabia, and Jamal was critical of MBS's operating style. Who MBS, although only crown prince, effectively runs Saudi Arabia. His father, King Salman, is 82 years old, in declining physical health. Certainly, I mean, he's often seen using a stick, and many reports that I've heard, and also published reports, are that King Salman is in declining mental health as well, which, to put it kindly, means he's no longer as alert and functioning as he was 20 years ago.
And so it's in this context that Jamal Khashoggi sort of falls out to favor with MBS, and he flees the country at some point?
Yes. Essentially, he decided he couldn't, if he wasn't allowed to write or to tweet within Saudi Arabia, he'd leave the country. And he came here to the United States and set up home in a suburb of Washington, out in Northern Virginia. And more recently, he started having a op-ed column in the Washington Post. And the columns are interesting to read, but they don't set I didn't think set the world alight. They were written very much in the tone of more in sorrow than in anger. Wouldn't it be a bit better if the public was consulted on the major changes which are taking place in Saudi Arabia in terms of the economy and social changes?
But nothing like totally revolutionary, right?
Well, in terms of what's written and said about people in Washington D.C. in the American political system, it was all fairly tame stuff. Mm-hmm. But in Saudi terms, it seems, and we don't know for certain, but I mean it's becoming increasingly clear that MBS was particularly wounded by what he was saying and irritated with his ability to say it, and to say it prominently and to a large audience.
And so it seems from what we know of the story, Jamal Khashoggi was in Turkey. He visited the consulate in Istanbul to get some pretty banal sort of diplomatic papers related to an upcoming marriage, and never left the building. And we're seeing all these leaks from Turkish intelligence in U.S. papers, suggesting that he was very brutally murdered, and this was all sort of pre-planned and premeditated, and likely to have been directed directly by MBS himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is correct, but there's a nuance there which, in a situation, essentially makes the situation worse. That not only have the leaks been to Turkish newspapers and other journalists, but the Turkish government has also been briefing either the embassies or the intelligence agencies of a variety of its allies. I suspect the British and I suspect the CIA have also been briefed on what the Turks have learned. And it's that part which, frankly, has made the situation so serious, because these governments are now increasingly profoundly concerned about what they've learned.
So let's kind of talk about the diplomatic fallout of this incident. I mean, you have an American resident, someone who's well known, well liked in Washington D.C. among sort of elite circles, living in Turkey, going into the Saudi consulate and never coming out. Um, First, could you place this incident in the context of Turkish-Saudi relations, which I take it were weakening up to this point, but now might be sort of profoundly damaged? Could you sort of explain the implication
yes,
there? Yeah.
There's a historical aspect to that, and also a more contemporary angle. The historical angle is that Turkey is a big country with a long history in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia is geographically speaking of equal size or thereabouts, with also history in the Middle East. And if you take it back to what is 100 years, more than 100 years, there was Turkish control of at least some parts of Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia, and there was therefore local Arab resentment at that Turkish control. So people tend to have long memories. The more up-to-date aspect of this is that Turkey under President Erdogan has become more Islamic than what it's been in the past, and it sees essentially a role for political Islam. President Erdogan's AKP political party is a Islamic party. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia sees itself as the center of the Islamic world, and under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has apparently been moving in the direction of a more moderate Islam, and the influence of the Islamic clergy in Saudi Arabia appears to be diminishing. So there's a different interpretation, a different ideological interpretation of the role of Islam in each of the countries.
And of course, layered on top of that are certain rivalries in Syria as well.
Yeah. On top of that, Turkey abuts Syria and therefore is very concerned about what's going on in Syria. Turkey is a ally of Qatar, the small state in the Gulf, which Saudi Arabia has been leading a blockade against for the last more than 12 months. Also for complicated reasons, including historical reasons, but essentially because Qatar believes in a form of political Islam, which the Saudis and certainly their allies in this, the Emiratis, the United Arab Emirates, are uncomfortable with.
So both Turkey and Saudi Arabia, of course, are allies of the United States, and it seems that Turkey might be using this as an opportunity to try to drive a wedge between the Saudi-U.S. alliance. I don't know if you saw the news today that Turkey was releasing this Christian pastor that had sort of been long detained and had been sort of a favorite cause of, say, Vice President Pence. It seems as if they're doing that to sort of curry favor in this particularly volatile moment.
That there is a coincidence in timing here. The pastor who appears to have been released after facing a huge prison term for allegedly mixing religion with politics or complicated variations of that apparent sin, was due to appear in court today anyway. He's been due to appear today for many weeks, if not months. And the apparent demise of Jamal Khashoggi, of course, only started last week. So it's a coincidence of timing, but the release of this pastor would seem to be a move which will be very much welcomed in Washington. And therefore, in the circumstances, and it's a bit of a stretch, but not too much of a stretch, it puts Washington on the side of Turkey at this time, rather than on the side of Saudi Arabia.
So I wanted to have a broader conversation now about how this incident might change, or might be like a really important historical inflection point in Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States. First of all, do you think that has the potential to be the case? Do you think that's already the case, that this incident might forever change America's relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Well, forever is a awkward word, but it certainly has two very great impacts. There's a short-term impact of outrage actually across the world, but certainly in the United States. The media is outraged, Congress is outraged, the bureaucratic Washington is outraged, the White House is, it's outraged some days and not quite so outraged the next day, but that's symptomatic of whatever the president decides to tweet on or say on a particular day. So there is this short-term problem of how do we get through this, balancing a needed condemnation of Saudi Arabia with also the importance that the long-term relationship with Saudi Arabia means that do we really want to cut it completely tomorrow? And I think the answer to that is no, we don't. There are too many things at stake. But then looking into the slightly longer term, there's this conduct of MBS, who appears to have organized or be responsible for the demise of Jamal Khashoggi. And this is a young man. He's 33 years old. He's going to be king of Saudi Arabia when his father dies, or at least that's the most obvious prediction. And yet he has a curious way of doing foreign affairs. This is the man who went to war in Yemen to sort out an Iranian-backed group of tribesmen. And 3 years on, he hasn't managed to sort it out militarily, and it is a growing humanitarian crisis, with the risk that it will become a calamitous humanitarian crisis. And there's been the rift with Qatar, whereby they wanted to change Qatar's foreign policy and indeed its domestic policy. So Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain and Egypt have been blockading it. This is a policy which has singularly failed to do to cause any change in Qatar. There was this curious incident whereby the visiting Lebanese prime minister was essentially forced to announce his resignation while he was in Saudi Arabia. But as soon as he left the country and got back to Lebanon, he unresigned, which to everybody's mind made the Saudis look stupid. And then more recently, earlier this year, Saudi Arabia got very upset about a tweet by the Canadian Foreign Ministry, concerned about the fate of a Saudi whose wife was living in exile in Canada. And the Saudis have all but declared war on Canada. And this is simply crazy. To respond like this appeared to be totally out of proportion to what might have been the difference. And so the danger of this is, do we forgive MBS for yet another sin, or do we try to change his behavior, or do we face the prospect that 3 months down the road, or 6 months down the road, or next year, he's going to make yet another foreign policy mistake, which will be bad, mad, or just simply stupid?
Well, I guess what's interesting to me is, you have these, cascading foreign policy failures, including sort of a prosecution of a calamitous war in Yemen, which has killed untold thousands, but yet it is the murder of one journalist who is, well connected in elite circles in Washington, D.C., that seems to be causing a kind of outrage that we hadn't seen over, say, the war in Yemen or the diplomatic spat with Canada. I mean, you have, for example, like media companies and other companies that are pulling out of this big conference in Saudi Arabia, the so-called Davos of the desert. You might perhaps see some movement on Capitol Hill concerning an arms sale ban over Saudi's conduct in the war in Yemen. This sort of might move things, it seems, at least in this early stage, in ways that those other previous foreign policy missteps and offenses did not. And I'm wondering if you agree.
Yes, but I think I can understand your grief and your sense of this is weird the way this is playing out. But it is understandable because the incident itself defies understanding. The idea that it's not as if Jamal Khashoggi ended up just disappearing and his body discovered floating down the Bosphorus in Istanbul, or it's not as if his body was found in some dark alley in Istanbul, where the victim of an apparent robbery which went wrong or something like this. He was enticed into the consulate and then appears to have been slaughtered in the most horrific manner. The incident itself is wholly shocking, and the question mark of what the hell happens now or where we go from here, these question marks are huge.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree. I did want to ask you, though, to what extent do you think the Trump administration's policies towards Saudi Arabia, the sort of apparently sort of warm relationship between, say, Jared Kushner and MBS, kind of created this enabling environment in which MBS thought that he could reasonably get away with pulling off an atrocious crime such as the one you described, and yet still more or less maintain kind of normal relations with the United States?
I think it's a question to ask. I'm not sure whether we'll ever particularly get an answer from in Washington, D.C. terms. But my working understanding of the way that MBS operates is that he is immensely sure of himself and may listen to alternative points of view, but is unpersuaded by them. He is confident in his own position, in that his father has given him great powers, and he feels absolutely, from his point of view, he can't really see what he's done wrong, nor does he think the need to apologize for it. To us, who are sort of framing the question, why on earth did you think you could get away with this? He doesn't appear to have thought that question at all. And regrettably, there don't appear to be anybody around about him in terms of close advisors who, take a deep breath and say, that might not be such a great idea. Can we sleep on that and let's discuss it again in the morning? He doesn't appear to have that sort of advisor. And this is...
the adult in the room, as Bob Corker would say.
Yeah. This is why apparently this has happened. And this is why it is so challenging to work out what we do about it in the immediate short term, the now, and in the longer term, if this man is going to be continue to be the leader for decades ahead, apparently, of Saudi Arabia, which is such a significant country because of its large oil reserves and its large oil exports, and the fact that it's the leader of the Islamic world, and the kings of Saudi Arabia are the custodians of the two holy places of Mecca and Medina. This is not just another country.
So on that note, let me ask you one final question, which is, what do you believe would be an appropriate U.S. response to this incident?
I think that is, it needs to be more considered than what it currently is. But as soon as there is not just concern about the fate of Jamal Khashoggi, but near certainty about the fate of Jamal Khashoggi, the U.S., the Congress inevitably, I think, will try to slow down, if not stop, military supplies to the kingdom. Whether it's appropriate or not is a different argument. I'm certain it will almost certainly happen. And the White House should take measures before trying to repair the relationship to show the extent of concern, which may be to expel the Saudi ambassador here in Washington, D.C., who, as it happens, is Khalid bin Salman. He's the younger brother of MBS. He's back in Riyadh at the moment trying to get answers for the American questions. Let's see if he's going to come back. And that will be another measure. We've also got a concern, but it seems trivial, but it might also, there's a list of necessary things to do if this turns out to be necessary. The Adel al-Jubeir, who used to be the Saudi ambassador here, who's now the Saudi foreign minister, the consulate in Istanbul, notionally, I would have thought, comes under part of his responsibility. Adel al-Jubeir maintains a residence in the D.C. suburbs where he likes to come and visit in his private time. I think he might need to be told, we don't want you for the moment. If some Saudis, i.e. Jamal Khashoggi, can't live in a suburb of Washington, D.C., neither can you.
Well, Simon, thank you for your time. I'm sorry about the loss of Jamal Khashoggi, who you said was a friend, was an acquaintance. So my best, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for listening to me, and I hope that I've managed to answer your questions as well as can be answered at this stage.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Simon Henderson. I suspect some of you out there listening might have known Jamal Khashoggi. My condolences. I did not know him, but I knew people who did, and he seems to have been just a wonderful interlocutor and journalist and analyst, and my condolences to you all. All right. We will see you next time. Bye.